The History of Poland, Episode 20, 3 Fables. Hello and welcome back. When last we checked in with the Piast, Bolesław had just received word from Emperor Henry V that the Emperor was pretty upset with the Polish ruler. Bolesław had, after all, interfered with Henry's attempted invasion of Hungary and had been causing a ruckus in Bohemia as well. In response to these usurpations of his supposed authority as emperor, Henry sent thus to Bolesław, as recorded for us by the chronicler Gallus. Quote, "It is improper for an emperor, and forbidden by Roman laws, to enter the territory of a foe, and especially one who is his knight, in hostile fashion, before asking him to choose peace should he wish to obey, or war should he resist, so that he be able to prepare himself. Therefore you must either grant your brother the half of the kingdom and give me 300 marks yearly in tribute or the same number of fighting men for campaigns, or else divide the kingdom of Poland with me by the sword, if you can." End quote. So, according to Henry's letter, Bolesław had a choice. Option 1 is to give half the kingdom back to Zbigniew and promise to provide tribute, and presumably take an oath of fealty, to Henry. In return, Henry would not invade Poland and Bolesław wouldn't have to face down the imperial army. Option 2 is to try and stand and fight against the might of Henry's imperial army, which, from the way described in the note, seems difficult at face value. From my perspective, neither of these seem like great options, but of the two it seems as though option 2 would be a little bit better. After all, you can either not fight and lose at least half your kingdom, or fight and still lose that same kingdom. Bolesław responded, saying, quote, "If it is our money or Polish troops that you seek as tribute, you may call us women, not men, if we do not defend our liberty. To take back a person who caused sedition, or to partition an undivided kingdom with him, is not something that any person's violence and power will force me to do, unless it be the common counsel of my men and my own will and decision. Now if you had called for money or troops in aid of the Church of Rome, amicably, not violently, you might perhaps receive no less aid and counsel from us than your forebears did from ours. So take good care to whom you threat. If war you want, it's war you'll get." End quote. What's interesting about Bolesław's response is not that he refused Henry's demands. After all, this is Bolesław we're talking about. He's not exactly known for sitting back and taking the peaceful option. No, what's interesting is that Bolesław was using the church as a lever to position Poland as an equal to Henry's empire. This is because, in the view of Henry, Poland answered to the empire. In the view of Bolesław, both of them answered to the church, putting them on more of an equal footing than was acceptable to the emperor. Seems a little theoretical, but it mattered. I find this moment to be one of the more interesting ones in the life of Bolesław. He's managed to solidify his hold on Poland, true, but the imperial army is another story. And unlike when he went to fight in Bohemia to draw the imperial army out of Hungary, Bolesław is fighting with only his own forces. In the words of the Greek historian Thucydides, he who voluntarily confronts tremendous odds must have very great internal resources to draw upon. And so it was. In response to Bolesław's decree that he was prepared for any and all incursion, Henry launched an invasion of Poland with a few goals. First, to put Zbigniew back in power of at least half of Poland, with the unstated goal likely being that Zbigniew would be the senior ruler of the two. That is, if Henry was even going to let Bolesław survive the fracas. Second, to make sure that Poland didn't present much of a threat on the eastern side of the Holy Roman Empire. A divided house is one that can be more easily knocked over if it comes to it. Third, to make an example of Bolesław. This one is more a reading between the lines on my part. So imagine that you're Henry. You've been crowing about how Bolesław should really be pledged to you, that you're his feudal overlord as emperor, and that he owes his allegiance to your empire. With all of those claims, you can't just let him get away with ignoring you. If the other nobles in the empire start to catch wind of your leniency, you may end up with an even bigger problem on your hands. The ensuing conflict is fascinating and provides us a very detailed look at a prolonged conflict in Poland. Much of this account comes from Gallus, and I'll be quoting from him at length, especially since he manages to leave out some of the more, let's call them questionable methods of recording history that he's used in the past. To begin with, Gallus tells us the opening moves of both Henry and Bolesław. For Henry, after receiving word of Bolesław's refusal, he turned to his advisors and his nearby bannermen. This happens to include both the Bohemians and Zbigniew. Both urged Henry to invade Poland. The Bohemians likely wanted Henry to put a stop to Bolesław's string of military successes, thus enabling them to resume their regular pillaging of Poland. Zbigniew, meanwhile, wanted his seat of power back, obviously. I like to think of Zbigniew in terms of the Odyssey. For those that don't recall, when Odysseus was on his long journey home from Troy, he was held up by the goddess Calypso. In recounting this later on, Odysseus is said to have declared, "So true it is, that nothing is sweeter than a man's own land and his parents, even if it be in a rich house that he dwells." Zbigniew may have been a guest of the rulers of Bohemia, but it just wasn't Polish soil. In both the cases of Zbigniew and the Bohemians, they apparently told Henry that the population would welcome Zbigniew's return and throw off the rule of Bolesław. In this, they were mistaken. In fact, as Henry entered into Polish territory, he ran into the fortified castle of Bytom. As Gallus tells us, quote, "At the sight of the castle of Bytom, he realized that it was well armed and fortified. He turned angrily to Zbigniew and exclaimed in indignation, 'Zbigniew, is this how the Poles acknowledge you as lord? Is this how they plan to abandon your brother and call for your lordship?' Indeed, with its defenses and its natural position, surrounded by waters, the castle of Bytom was impregnable, and the emperor decided to bypass it with his columns of troops. But some of his knights of repute rode off to the castle, wishing to prove their martial prowess in Poland and to test the strength and the courage of the Poles. However, the garrison in response opened the gates and sallied forth with swords at the ready. Undaunted either by the numerous host of diverse peoples or the charge of the Germans or the presence of the emperor, they faced them boldly and resisted manfully. The sight of this greatly amazed the emperor. How could unprotected men face foot soldiers, or foot soldiers face knights in armor with bare swords, and go into battle as cheerfully as if they were going to a feast? He felt, in a way, angry at the presumption of his men, and sent up archers and crossbowmen, feeling sure that this at least would frighten off the defenders and compel them to withdraw into the castle. But the spears and arrows that flew from all sides were like snow or raindrops to the Poles. Now, for the first time, the emperor appreciated the Poles' courage and called his men back, not at all unharmed." End quote. Not an auspicious start to his campaign. But to be fair, Bolesław was not doing that much better. You see, when this all kicked off, he was not exactly prepared for a major war. Instead, he was just wrapping up his latest squabble in the northern areas near Pomerania. In fact, realizing what a threat Henry and Zbigniew posed to Poland as they invaded from the south, Bolesław seems to have given up his recently conquered lands and rushed to the south with his already exhausted troops. As he rushed southwards, he sent a small contingent of troops ahead to harass Henry's forces if they attempted to cross the Oder River into Poland, hopefully slowing him down enough to ensure that Bolesław had time to prepare for the defense of Poland. These troops evidently saw no action. Instead, Gallus tells us that, quote, "The emperor did not, however, turn aside to test the fords either upstream or downstream, but crossed the river near the city of Głogów in force, in dense columns, in full armor, at an unforeseen place where no one previously knew that one could cross. He met with no resistance, as the townsmen were unprepared and the garrison had no suspicion nor thought to have any suspicions about that place. It was the feast day of St. Bartholomew the Apostle when the emperor was crossing, and the whole population of the city was hearing divine service. Accordingly, he crossed over without trouble or danger, capturing a great deal of booty and captives near the town, as well as tents. Many of the men who had come to defend the castle and were encamped in tents outside the castle were prevented by the emperor from entering the castle. Some were seized right away, some managed to escape by flight. One of the fugitives met Bolesław and told him everything that had happened. At this point, Bolesław did not bolt like a frightened rabbit, but as a spirited warrior urged his men on, saying, "O bravest of warriors, you have worn yourselves out in many battles and campaigns with me. Now again stand by me, ready to live or die for Poland's liberty. For my part, I would willingly take on the emperor with so few troops, if I knew for what that even if I died here, I would end the tribulations of our country. But since for every one of us there is 100 of the enemy, it is more honorable to hold back than to venture there with few and die a reckless death. If we remain here and block their crossing, this will be deemed as good as a victory." So he spoke and set about cutting down trees to block the stream by which he was standing. End quote. Gallus goes on to tell us that while this was going on, Henry managed to solicit some hostages from the occupants of Głogów. Gallus tells us that, quote, In the meantime, however, the emperor accepted hostages under oath from the people of Krakow on the understanding that if the townsmen sent an embassy with an offer of peace and a treaty within the space of 5 days, they would receive a reply, and, whether peace was agreed to or not, they would still receive back their hostages. In fact, all this was a trick. The emperor's reason for receiving hostages under oath was that he thought he could gain possession of the city through them, even if it meant perjuring himself. And the reason the people of Krakow handed over the hostages was that they had in the meantime fortified those parts of the city which had crumbled with age. End quote. This acquiescence on the part of the townspeople of Krakow did not sit well with Boleslav at all, which, to be fair, is pretty understandable. While he's out there making ready for a crucial stand against Henry's forces, the very subjects Boleslav is ostensibly fighting on behalf of are cutting a side deal to sit out the war. Gallus tells us Boleslav's response, saying, quote, "When Boleslav heard of the embassy and the giving of hostages, he was outraged. He threatened to crucify the townspeople if they surrendered the castle for the sake of them, adding that it was better and more honorable for both the townsmen and the hostages to perish by the sword for their country's sake than by surrender to purchase a life of disgrace and live as slaves to foreign peoples." When they heard his response, the townsmen sent back word that Boleslav refused to accept peace on those terms and called for the return of their hostages, as had been sworn to. The emperor's reply to this was, "If you surrender the castle, I will not keep the hostages, but if you are rebellious, I will kill both you and the hostages." The people of the town retorted, "Regarding the hostages, you can commit both perjury and murder, but know this, in no way will you obtain what you want by using them." End quote. Then Gallus gets into the meat of the conflict. Enough words, it's time for steel to meet steel, in this battle that would come to be known as the Battle of Krakow. Gallus tells us that, quote, "After this exchange, the emperor gave orders for equipment to be prepared, arms donned, the legions divided, a rampart to be raised around the city, and the standard bearers to sound the trumpets. He then launched an assault upon the city from all sides with iron, fire, and siege engines. The townsfolk in turn deployed themselves upon the gates and towers, fortified the battlements, made ready their equipment, and stored rocks and water above the gates and towers. The emperor then had the idea that he might be able to sway the townspeople through their affection for their sons and friends, so he ordered the more noble among the hostages of the town, including the son of the Comes, to be bound to siege engines, thinking in this way the city would be opened without bloodshed. But the townsmen would no more spare their sons and relatives than the Czechs and Germans. Instead, they drove them from the walls with sticks and weapons. The emperor, realizing that he would never win the city with such tactics or shake the townspeople in their resolve, and decided to win by force of arms what he had been denied by guile. So the castle was assaulted from all directions, and from both sides a ringing cry went up. The Germans charged the castle. The Poles kept them at bay. Engines on all sides hurled bolts, crossbows twanged, spears and arrows flew through the air. Shields were shattered, armor pierced, helmets smashed apart. The dead fell, the wounded retired. Fresh men took their place. The Germans cranked their crossbows. The Poles replied with engines and crossbows. The Germans fired arrows. The Poles arrows and spears as well. The Germans whirled stones from slings. The Poles hurled millstones along with sharpened stakes. The Germans tried to approach the walls under the cover of wooden beams, but the Poles prepared them a bath of boiling water and scorching flames. The Germans brought up iron rams to the towers, but the Poles rolled down wheels bristling with steel spikes. The Germans placed ladders and tried to climb up, but the Poles gaffed them with iron hooks and left them suspended in midair." End quote. This back-and-forth struggle continued on and on. Meanwhile, Boleslav was apparently in the thick of the fighting. Realizing that this siege wasn't going to produce a favorable result for his army, Henry decided to move on to the city of Wrocław. This led to what has been dubbed by historians as the Battle of Pole, or the Battle of Hunsfield. These names mean dog's field, due to the ferocity with which the dogs ate the corpses left on the battlefield. So, that's a pleasant word picture. Gallus tells us what happened, saying of Henry, quote, "But here he again realized Boleslav's strength and ingenuity. For wherever the emperor turned, or wherever he set up camp and placed outposts, Boleslav too advanced, sometimes before him, sometimes after him, but always remaining the neighbor of the emperor in his quarters. And when the emperor set out and moved camp, Boleslav would always be his companion on his journey. If anyone left their ranks and could not remember the way back immediately, or if ever a party of them, trusting in numbers, went further from camp in search of supplies or fodder for the horses, Boleslav would immediately move between them and the main force, so those in search of plunder themselves fell prey to Boleslav. As a result, he reduced this large and fine army to such a state of fear that even the Czechs, born robbers, were forced to eat what they had or to go hungry. For none of them dared to set foot outside camp. No soldier would go to collect grass, nor even venture beyond the lines of the watch in order to relieve themselves. Boleslav was feared day and night. He was in everyone's thoughts. Boleslav, who never sleeps, they called him. If there was a little grove or a patch of bushes, "Watch out," they would shout. "He's hiding in wait there." There was no place where they might not imagine Boleslav to be. So he wore them down relentlessly, like a wolf, taking some at times from the front, at times from the rear, and at times moving in from the flanks. So every day the soldiers advanced fully armed, and at all times awaited Boleslav as if he were present. Even at night they all slept in armor or manned the outposts, some keeping watch and some moving about the camp all night. Some shouted, "Keep awake, watch out, be on guard." End quote. The growing renown of Boleslav appeared to have an impact on the morale of Henry's troops and senior military leaders, to the point where Henry decided to cut his losses. He sent word to Boleslav the following message, saying, quote, "The Emperor to Duke Boleslav of Poland, grace and greetings. Having discovered your qualities, I am acquiescing to the advice of my princes, and on receipt of 300 marks I will withdraw from here in peace. This is enough to satisfy my honor if we have peace and love at the same time. However, if you choose to reject this offer, you can soon expect me in the city of Krakow." End quote. This request for peace was likely just Henry trying to save face. He clearly had given up the idea of putting Zbigniew in command of Poland and was looking for a token payment before returning home, licking his wounds. With his string of victories continuing to grow and having a strong home field advantage, Boleslav politely declined. Just kidding. It wasn't polite. This is Boleslav. Instead, Boleslav declared that, quote, "Peace indeed, but not in hope of money. It rests in your imperial power to proceed or return, but from me you will not get a single farthing. Whether through threats or bargaining, I would rather lose at this hour the kingdom of Poland while keeping its freedom than retain it peacefully forever in shame." End quote. In a slow conclusion to the conflict, Gallus tells us that, quote, "Having heard this, the emperor headed to Wrocław, but all he obtained there were dead men for living. For some while he pretended as if he was going to go to Krakow, and marched hither and thither near the river, thinking thus to unnerve Boleslav and make him change his mind. But Boleslav was not in the least dismayed for all that, and kept replying to the emperor's emissaries exactly as before. The emperor realized that staying there longer threatened to bring him loss and disgrace rather than honor and profit, so he resolved to turn back, taking as tribute nothing but the corpses." End quote. This phase of the war ended. Boleslav took a moment to collect his thoughts, let his troops rest, and plan his revenge. He knew that the emperor invaded at the instigation of the Czechs, and that slight needed to go repaid. But continuing with the unexpected trend of quoting ancient Greeks in this episode, as Herodotus says, "Haste in every business brings failure," which is where we're going to leave things for this episode. We'll jump back into things next time with a bit of Bohemian-Polish conflict,